what's going on, Los Angeles, Bruin Nation, LAFB fam, your dynamic duo, the Thriller and the Madman, back together again to talk all things UCLA football for our beloved Bruins. Today's going to be a really fun episode. We're going to be talking about 2025 schedule. Should be a lot of fun here. But first and foremost, before we talk any ball, how's my brother from another mother doing? Thriller, how we been the last couple of days? How's life? How's everything going?
Everything's been going great, man. It's summertime here in Los Angeles. And, with Media Day kind of creeping up next week, football is going to be starting here in roughly 5 weeks from now, roughly. I mean, it is very exciting to kind of see the stems of the season kind of create itself for UCLA and the rest of the country as a whole, man. So we're got a fun episode ahead for the listeners. We're going to be talking about the UCLA schedule. I'm excited for this one. This is going to be a lot of fun. We can dive into what teams we think UCLA's got to come out and win. We got to talk about the toughest games on UCLA's schedule. It's going to be a blast. So I'm stoked to be here as always, man.
Absolutely, brother. Unbelievable, right? I mean, hard to believe, at the time of this recording, we're just at about 40 days until kickoff, Thriller. I mean, August 30th, season opener, the Rose Bowl against the Utah Utes. Yeah. It's only 40 days away. And given just how fast time has been flying over the course of the spring and the summer, this thing's going to be here before we know it. And we're going to be ensconced into another season. So exciting, as always, to embark on another Bruins season with you. Brother, we are framing 2025 schedule here. Really robust conversation. I think this is going to go in a ton of different ways. And I think it's going to be so much fun to sort of dissect and debate and break things down. But the way we have initially framed this conversation is, what do you believe are the 5 most important games for UCLA in 2025? And I think your definition of importance may be different from my definition of importance. Importance could be things that are marquee. Importance could be these got to be must win. Importance could be, hey, these are big. This is big for recruiting and the brand moving forward. So I think the definition of importance is going to vary. But we'll start the conversation there. Thriller, over to you. Who are those 5 most important games in your mind for 2025 and why?
Man, really dove deep into this topic last night as we were getting ready for this. My 5 games are probably pretty similar to yours. I've got Utah, the opening game. How could we not talk about that? I think that's going to be huge as a tone setter for the season and kind of a measuring stick for where UCLA stands heading into the fall. I've got the Penn State game, and I know a lot of people are like, hey, man, Penn State's probably the number 1 team in the country. That's going to be an interesting game for a lot of different topics as I'll kind of dive into that. I've got the Indiana game, 42-13. We lost at the Rose Bowl last year. And, we have the former offensive coordinator from Indiana coming to UCLA and Tino Sinceri. I think that's going to be a great game. That's going to be in Bloomington on October 25th. And then a combination between Nebraska and Washington. And I'm going to dive into all of those different topics when we kind of get there. What were your 5 biggest games on paper before we dive into each one individually?
Yeah, Thriller. So I love the 5 that you picked because I think the way you have framed importance is based on kind of stepping stone, the marquee nature. I would imagine, and we're going to dive into it, but Penn State feels like the ultimate barometer game in so many different ways, right? And then when you think about Indiana, that revenge factor, Tino Sinceri, just how much have we sort of closed that gap? When you talk about Washington, you're talking about the jetfish factor as always in terms of that dynamic. Always. So I love the 5 that you've picked, and I can't wait to get into it more. I took a slightly different approach in terms of how I define the 5 most important games. I define the 5 most important games as the games that will have the biggest swing to UCLA's schedule and record this year. And what I mean by that is when I look at the schedule, Thriller, I see 4 games that are very, very winnable. And then I see 3 games that are very much of a stretch. And so when you look at those 7 games, and I'll break down what those 7 are, I think law of averages sort of playing out, UCLA is going to be 4-3 in those 7 games. Again, they got 4 winnable games. They got 3 games that are probably going to be a loss. To me, it's going to be those 5 games in the middle that aren't these 7 that are going to swing UCLA season anywhere from 4 wins to 9 wins, because there's such swing games in my mind. There's such 50-50 games. So to me, Thriller, the way I sort of broke it down is at UNLV, home for New Mexico, at Northwestern, home for Maryland. Those 4 feel like wins, right? I mean, in terms of UNLV, UNM, non-Power 4 teams, they're up and coming. I think at UNLV could be an interesting atmosphere in Vegas, obviously. But, those are wins, especially where you're trying to go and the culture and the habits and the development that you're trying to establish. UNLV, UNM are wins. When you look at Northwestern and home for Maryland, both of those teams last year were 4-8.
By the way, Justin Martin at Maryland we may be playing J Mart in that game.
Exactly, playing J Mart in that game. But J Mart well. Presumably in terms of having been the development, those got to be wins too, in my mind. So you're sitting there with 2 non-Power 4 teams and 2 4-8 sort of teams at the bottom of the Big Ten. Those 4 to me got to be wins. And then on the flip side, Thriller, you got 3 games that I'm excited to sort of delve into it from a barometer standpoint, but it would be hard for me to sit here, as much as you and I love UCLA, to say we're going to win these 3 games. And you know where I'm going with this. Home for Penn State, at Ohio State, and at Indiana. To me, that just feels like that's a stretch. You're talking about the defending national champions in the horseshoe. You're talking about the team that many people believe may dethrone the defending national champions in the Big Ten and perhaps even beyond in Penn State. And then you're talking about an Indiana team that went to the college football playoff and playing them in Bloomington with a reloaded unit and Kirk Cignetti still being there. So to me, those 3 feel like where that's a bit too far of a stretch as a loss. And so you got these 4 wins, you got these 3 losses. And so to me, Thriller, the 5 most important games are those 5 games in between. It's home for Utah, and we'll divide it and discuss that. At Michigan State, home for Nebraska, home for Washington, at USC. To me, those to me are the 5 most important games, because that to me is where the swing in the schedule can take place and are the most 50-50 games in my mind. Your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I loved everything you said, man. And I think we should probably just start by diving into Utah. The opening game under the lights. It's going to be a primetime game on Fox, the debut of Nico Iamaleava for UCLA. We've been waiting for it. It's going to be a game that I think a lot of people are just going to – it's the classic sleeper Utah team. Like, you can never count this team out with Kyle Whittingham at the helm there. They're the West Coast Iowa, man. That's what they are. They're 8-9 wins. You know what the floor is. They had a rough year last year, but they go and get this quarterback, Devin Dampierre, that I think was considering UCLA coming from New Mexico. He actually brought his offensive coordinator, Jason Beck, to come with him from New Mexico. They ranked 4th in total offense last year. Utah, on the other hand, ranked 115th in total offense. They had the great defenses they normally have. It's going to be a matchup, man, because what Dampierre is pretty average at is throwing the football, 12 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. But where he is exceptional at is running the football, 1,166 yards on the ground and 19 touchdowns, man. This dude ran for 19 touchdowns at the quarterback position last year. So 31 total touchdowns. This is going to be I feel like a classic, like, gunslinging game between Nico and what Dampierre can do on the ground. And, it's going to come down to, can UCLA force those turnovers against Dampierre in these types of plays? I mean, and if you get off on this start, man, you win the opening game against Utah, you get that momentum. Let's take a look at the schedule here as I'm just going to pull this up real quick.
Well, Thrill, let me ask you this real quickly. Yeah. You think Dampierre beats out Isaac Wilson?
I do 100%. Given that the offensive coordinator transferred from New Mexico as well, given that they were 115th in total offense with Isaac Wilson last year. So I would say yes, and he just offers more upside with the dual threat ability than Isaac Wilson does.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And that, to your point, Thriller, I mean, that's where the matchup, it's sort of the rubber meets the road, right? You got the running quarterback in Dampierre, and that where this team is going to be tested immediately with the loss of the fearsome foursome, right? And so now everything in terms of the replacements, Nico de Villiers, it's going to be trial by fire. You got Gary Smith. You got Keanu Williams. All of these guys now are going to be tested immediately in that first game. So that's what I think to me makes it so dynamite. So completely agree with you there.
Yeah, man. And then you look at the following weeks. I mean, if you could beat Utah week 1, you got UNLV, Dan Mullins there, former Mississippi State coach, former, Tim Tebow offensive coordinator at Florida, famously under Urban Meyer. He's got that program kind of on the upswing a little bit, but, I think they're still very beatable in year 1 with Dan Mullen. You got New Mexico the following week that lost that OC and their quarterback. And then you got Northwestern and David Braun, great coach at Northwestern. I don't know if they have enough in the fire this year to kind of get back to where they were a couple of years ago as the surprise team in the Big Ten. So you could hypothetically, Madman, be sitting at 4-0 heading into that Penn State game. And that kind of leads into my next big game with Penn State. The reason I like this, because Penn State, I think on paper for a lot of people could be better. They added Jim Knowles, the legendary defensive coordinator. This is a year where a lot of people are picking them number 1, number 2, number 3 in the national polls as a whole. And then you go and you get, the offensive line, 5 starters returning. You get Drew Aller back. You get maybe the best backfield in college football in Allen and Singleton. They did lose, very talented players like Tyler Warren and Abdul Carter. But UCLA fans, here's a couple advantages we have from what UCLA did last year. They played them very tough at home, on the road at Happy Valley. It was a 27-11 type of game there where Justin Martin, a backup quarterback, came in there, and they felt pretty confident. So I think this team believes that they can hang in the ballgame with this. And here's the biggest key for me. If we are 4-0 rolling with momentum into this game, Penn State the week before plays Oregon, September 27th. If they beat Oregon and they're riding high, this has the ingredients for the classic trap game in college football. And it's on the road. It's going to be at home for UCLA. They don't have to go back to Happy Valley. And I think one of the biggest swings, I mean, you talked about the Ohio States and the Penn States. What's the one position group that can swing these games when it's like a team that is highly undermatched compared to the other team? It's the quarterback position. We got Nico Iamaleava here now, the number 1 in the portal. What if Nico comes out there and plays to the level of that 5-star status we've kind of predicted him to be? There's a chance there, man. And like I said, Jim Knowles is there for sure, but you lost 2 top 15 picks in the NFL draft last year in Abdul Carter and Warren. I give them a shot here. What do you think about that?
No, Thriller, I totally sort of agree with you in terms of that breakdown. There's a couple of things to this game. One is, I think the key is going to be, how does this UCLA defensive line match up against that Penn State veteran, experienced, sort of all-American peppered offensive line with that two-headed monster at running back? That's going to be the key. If UCLA can stay close in that matchup, that sort of opens up the aperture for them to be able to pull off a potential gigantic upset in that sense. I love the element, Will, that you brought up of that classic trap game. You play this marquee game against Oregon, you're going to be up for Oregon, for Penn State, because let's not forget, Penn State lost that Big Ten championship game to Oregon last year. Revenge is going to be on their mind. Aller throws that late interception in the fourth quarter when Penn State was driving and coming back. That has been eating at him over the course of the offseason. A couple things have been eating at him at the offseason, but that's got to be at the top of the list. So that Penn State's going to be super focused that week before, and it's just so hard in college football, Will, when you're dealing with 18 to 22-year-old kids to maintain that same level of intensity 2 weeks in a row. So you expect Penn State to kind of come down emotionally a little bit, and that's when you can jump them. So I think if that defensive line can be close in terms of that matchup to the offensive line, you have something there. And here's the other thing that's sort of in UCLA's favor, Will. Penn State, for as decorated as they are and as much preseason love as they've been getting and as much success as they've had last year, I still believe there's questions about Drew Aller to be able to go away from the friendly confines of Happy Valley and really put a whole game together. You saw it in that Notre Dame game in the college football playoff. You've seen it in other elements. Look, SC had them down 14 at the half last year. That was an overtime game that went all the way by a game-winning field goal. He was very shaky the first 2.5 quarters of that game. So when you can put Aller in a situation, that Wisconsin game on the road comes to mind as well, Will, where they had to sort of grind it out there late in the third, early in the fourth. That was sort of a nip-tuck game. So Aller still has to prove that he can be elite on the road. And until he does that, there are going to be the shaky questions about him. And now if you take Tyler Warren, his ultimate favorite target, away, because the one thing that was deficient with Penn State last year is they didn't really have the wide receiver development, Will, that I think they were hoping for. And so you've got kind of still an unproven group at wide receiver. You've got a quarterback that hasn't really proven that he can win on the road. You're taking away their primary offensive weapon from a vertical pass game perspective. There's a shot there. They're coming down emotionally. All the ingredients for an upset. The key is just going to have to be, can this patchwork, re-architected defensive line just hold their own, against this offensive line? Because the last thing you want is, even if Aller doesn't have his fastball, if they can just turn around and run the ball 40 times at 6, 7, 8 yards a pop, it's going to be very difficult. So that's going to be the chess game. I love everything you said.
Yeah, man. That's going to be a game where Chisholm and Vaughns are going to have to really step up.
Yes, absolutely.
It has the classic, recipe for this offensive line is so gifted and talented. It could be 5 yards before anyone touches the type of player, given what the defensive line and the lack of experience they have. So that's going to be a game that is going to be a lot of fun, man. And if you beat Utah, you go into that game 4-0. So I have that game tabbed as a big one for UCLA, man.
No question about it. No question about it. And I mean, my goodness, Will, if they come in 4-0, and let's imagine Penn State's also already going to be ranked in the preseason very, very high, and they knock off Oregon. I mean, is that a situation where, does game day come to the Rose Bowl? I mean, you got to sort of believe a 4-0 UCLA team against potentially the number 1 team in the country in the rankings at that point. Like, if Penn State, given how high they're going to be ranked, if they knock off Oregon the week before, hard to imagine they won't be number 1 or certainly in the top 3. If UCLA makes their way to 4-0 with a nice win against Utah, got to believe UCLA early in the season, probably a 20-ish type of ranking, number 1 versus number 20 in the Rose Bowl. That's got all the makings for game day there, Will. So absolutely love how appetizing that matchup is. So got through Utah, got through Penn State, and now, Thriller, you're saying the next one is Nebraska, I believe.
No, I got Indiana.
Indiana.
Last year, Indiana 42-13 drubbing at the Rose Bowl. We came on and we thought the sky was falling, given how we expected Indiana to be as a football program. This was before the Kurt Cignetti renaissance and what we saw from him. And this guy is one of the most talented coaches, pound for pound, in football, period, at the pro and the college level. His career record's 130-37. So this guy brings a lot to the table. It's crazy to say this. Curtis Rourke, you could have made the argument, was the most efficient and maybe best quarterback in the Big Ten last year, and they may have gotten better at the position, which is just a crazy statement. This kid, Fernando Mendoza, talk about a rise. I looked up his recruiting profile. I've heard Nate Tice talk about this guy might be the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. I'm going, where was this guy recruited? This guy was a 3-star recruit, 1 Power 5 offer from Cal, and you just look at the tape that this kid possesses. It's actually mind-blowing how fast he can throw the ball and just the accuracy he possesses with that zip. So you get him into a situation where Cignetti is proven to be kind of a quarterback whisperer in his own words with his offense he's got going on there. And you return one of the best receivers in the Big Ten too, in Elijah Surratt. This kid can absolutely play. I think he's going to be a pro, probably a day 2 pick in the draft. And you get them back at Bloomington. But I think the big reason for this pick is you were embarrassed last year at home. 42-13, it was a drubbing. I want to see this as somebody that covers UCLA. How do you respond to getting out there? Like, if we're really as good as we think we can be, where we can get 7 to 8 wins in the regular season, maybe it's not a win, but maybe it's closer than we expect it to be, given what Indiana is. And if it is closer than we expect it to be, this team proves it's got a chance to be one of the best teams we've had in the last 4 to 5 years within the program. So a lot going on there. But what do you think about the Indiana comment?
It's so delicious, Will, and you've set it up so well. I want to double click on what you said. I'm so happy you brought it up about Mendoza. Okay, this kid might be the most unsung hero of college football going into 2025. You know, he went to Cal. He's sort of his parents were doctors who had very strong ties to Cal. That's sort of why he went to Cal in the first place. Because I think if that was not the case, he probably would have gone the JUCO route and then probably blown up in JUCO and then made his way to a much bigger program, a la a Cam Ward, a la what we saw from Cam Newton several years ago, et cetera, et cetera. This kid is so wildly talented. It's scary. He just didn't have the weapons really around him, nor the offensive line at Cal to really be consistently successful. But Will, let's not forget, last year, Cal, Miami, last early October, number 1 pick in the draft, Cam Ward and Mendoza go head-to-head. Mendoza outdueled Cam Ward in that game, totally outplayed him for 3 quarters. Cal sort of overheated in terms of fumbles, penalties, allowed Miami to come back in that game. Ward was able to throw some touchdowns there at the end. Mendoza shot for shot in that game, Will. If you looked objectively on the field, Mendoza was the better quarterback. And you're talking about the guy on the other end is the number 1 pick in the draft here in 2025. So Mendoza has all the makings to be a lottery pick in 2026, if not all the way number 1. I know it's crazy to sound, but think about where Cam Ward was in 2024 at Washington State. And in 1 year, the jump that he was able to make, Mendoza has all the ingredients to make that same jump this particular year. So we are going to have our hands full with Mendoza. Will, I think it's actually going to be the hardest game on the schedule from an opposing quarterback perspective. Because if you look at Ohio State, Julian Slayan, we talk about Drew Aller, I still have questions like we talked about it with Aller on the road. I think Mendoza is actually going to be the toughest challenge. To me, this game, Will, you mentioned it. It's about revenge. It's about persistence. It's about kind of having an attitude. To me, this is also going to be a game about the unknown and the disguise, because Cignetti knows Sanseri so well. Sanseri knows Cignetti so well. They both know each other's tendencies. And so who's going to be the one that throws the curveballs? Who's going to be the one that's going to break the patterns? Who's going to be the one that's going to do something that is unexpected? And I think that chess match to me is going to be absolutely fascinating moving forward. This will, like you said, kind of big game for Chisholm, big game for Vaughns and Penn State. This is a game here, Will. Our secondary is going to be significantly tested given how Indiana wants to spread it out. So how this unit keeps everything in front of them, plays with sound technique, no blown coverages, no big penalties, really kind of seizing that opportunity to me is going to be absolutely critical. But I love everything about this game, Will, and couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, man. And I think the big thing with the Indiana game for me is like just the quarterback, the throws that are going to be in this game. I mean, we watched the Nico Iamaleava highlights last year when he was spinning the rock for Tennessee. He makes some beautiful throws that you're like, that's a top 5 pick right there. And then you add up with Mendoza, what he can bring. Just the quarterbacking on that day is just so A1. It's going to be so much fun to watch as a fan of football.
And Will, the last thing I'll add about this game is where the counterpunch may come in this sort of Mendoza-Iamaleava battle is this could be a Justin Berger game. You know, this could be the game because where Indiana got in trouble last year is when you sort of physically ran the ball between the tackles on them and started wearing them down. And what that sometimes did was you start reducing the number of possessions, you keep that offense off the field, then they start pressing from time to time, you know, in those games. So is this a game where DeShaun Foster says, Tino, I know you know Kurt knows Tino, let me sort of say, hey, let's run the rock here down the middle and see what they're made of in terms of their front seven. So many sort of delicious ways this game can go. Can't wait for it.
Cannot wait, dude. And then just the last two I've got, it's Washington and Nebraska. They're kind of tied into one unit. And here's where it goes for UCLA's schedule. You've got the first 4 games we talked about, Utah, UNLV, New Mexico, Northwestern. You had the Penn State game. You got Michigan State. You got Maryland after that, which I think are 2 winnable games. So you on paper could have about 6 wins going into that Indiana game if you're playing your cards right. Those last 5 games are kind of a murderer's row. And if you want to reach the ceiling that this team can reach, we were talking about Indiana, you got Nebraska at home, then you go to Ohio State. And, I'm optimistic as a UCLA fan. We talked about the top. I don't foresee us going to the horseshoe and winning against the defending national champions. And then you got Washington and then USC to obviously close it out. I like these two matchups because I think Nebraska, despite us beating them last year at home, I think they're going to be a lot better of a football team coming into this year. Dylan Raiola is going to have another year under his belt. And this kid was the top quarterback recruit in the country the prior year. A lot of talent coming back. They just got former 5-star transfer from Missouri coming in, Ewan Nori. He is a baller off the edge, 6'6", 275 pounds. They've rebuilt the defensive line. And what I like about coupling Nebraska with Washington is Matt Rule and Jed Fish are culture changers.
Yep.
When you look at what Matt Rule inherited at a Temple or what he inherited when he went to Baylor, 2-1 win teams. In 2 years, he got them to 10-win teams, each of those programs. He started off in Nebraska. They hadn't made a bowl game in 6 years coming to last year. They actually made their first bowl game, so trajectory's coming. 5 wins in his first year, 7 in his next year. Nebraska's got a chance to be even better this year. I think we agree, with a 5-star talent kind of figuring himself out. So that's a game I've tabbed. And then you got Washington. Jed Fish, it's no secret. Anyone who's listened to the show, this guy is a Bruin killer through and through. Was ironically an interim head coach for us back at the end of the 2017 season before Chip Kelly became the head coach. But talk about a culture builder. He inherited 1-win Arizona and had them at 10 wins. I mean, that is so impressive for what we know about Tucson and what that program produces out there. They've got arguably two the best quarterback, running back potential.
Yes.
Them in the conference. Damon Williams looks like a star, and I'm a big fan of those guys that carry over from the bowl game into the next year. 376 yards, 4 touchdowns, and interception against Louisville in the bowl game. Looks like Kyler Murray Jr.
Totally
running the football. And then you got Jonah Coleman, who, like, outside of Singleton and Allen, I think he's got a chance to be one of the best running backs within the conference itself, because you have to understand Allen and Singleton are going to take carries away from each other as good as they are. Coleman might be like Big Ten all first team running back. Like, that's a real case that he could be there. So you got those powerful offenses and those coaches. And what I like about these games is you got them both at home. So you got Nebraska at home, you got Washington at home. If you could take care of business in both of these games, or at least win 2 of your last 5, we could be sitting at that preseason projection of 7-8 wins going into a bowl game. And then after that, I mean, the wheels are coming off for everybody else, and UCLA is going to be back in that scenario. So talk to me about what you think about those two.
I love it, Will. Absolutely. And Nebraska and Washington is where – so Utah, Nebraska, Washington is where you and I are similar, right? And I think you laid it out so beautifully. I'll start with Washington because I think what makes this game so dynamite is they're young at some key positions, obviously with Williams at quarterback. I think, the retooling of the receivers, they're young on defense. But man, oh man, does Williams look like Kyler Murray 2.0. Holy cow. I mean, we saw a taste of it last year in Seattle, Will. And after a full kind of 12 months of development, he is going to test our edges and the horizontal speed of this defense really in a way that could perhaps be unmatched over the course of the 2025 season. And I think what makes this matchup so unique and so challenging is that it's a thunder and lightning, right? With Williams, he's going to sort of, on these QB keepers, extending these plays, he's really going to stretch you horizontally. And then Coleman is your big thumper on the inside. Oh, yeah. And so you have to be ready for that combination. Very few teams sort of have a 1-2 combination that's true thunder and lightning. And we think of thunder and lightning as 2 running backs. In the case of Washington here, it's quarterback and running back, to your point, Will. And then when you just sort of add the Jed Fish element, every time Jed Fish plays UCLA, it feels personal. I mean, it's like The Last Dance when MJ's sitting there with his cigar and his whiskey, and he's just like, and I took it personally, and it just feels that way with Jed Fish. So he's always going to be up for that game. He's always going to want to prove a point in that game. So that's going to be very compelling moving forward. And then I love your point about Nebraska. Rule, there's no question about it. This guy is a program builder. Yeah. Year 2 is that jump, to your point, both for him as well as for Raiola. Raiola, for all of how decorated he was, he looked confused at times last
It's
season.
like an 18-year-old, right?
He was an 18-year-old. And I think what really confused him in that UCLA game, remember, that was the big game for Medrano, and he had that pick six. And the linebackers, he just didn't know what was going on. Femi and Medrano really confused him in terms of just how Femi on the edge and being able to sort of get to him so quickly, and Medrano with the disguises and going side to side. He didn't know when to go over the top. He didn't know when to check down. They were always very, very uncertain. But the crazy part of that game, Will, last year, if you recall, is as much as UCLA sort of dominated, it still came down to the end there. There was the big interception at the end of that game to secure that win on the road. You got to believe Raiola is going to be able to make a step here. And without Medrano, without Femi, are you going to be able to have that dynamism with Chisholm and with others to be able to keep confusing him? And we're going to see his evolution. So I love those two games in a very significant way, Will. And I think you're spot on. Look, Utah, Nebraska, Washington is where we're similar. You love Penn State and Indiana for the emotional, the marquee games. And I'll just say, which I totally agree with, what I really like is I like the Michigan State game and the SC game as being important games as well. Michigan State for me, Will, we talk about Jetfish, is Jonathan Smith. He was the other one that we could have gotten. And I think it's going to be really fascinating to see what he does in terms of being able to grow this program. Aiden Childs is there. He's got a veteran, quarterback. It's early in his tenure, but East Lansing is always a difficult place to play. They always have physical bodies on the offensive and defensive lines. And in this conference, Will, it's always going to be close games. It's always going to come down to special teams and turnovers late. UCLA has to grow up and really win a marquee game on the road. That's why, to me, this is going to be a very significant game because it's right there in that 50-50. And then you got the big one at the end in terms of the crosstown rivalry with SC. I think so much at stake here. As much as we're talking about the expectations with Nico Iamaleava, SC on the other side with Jaden Iamaleava, a lot of questions. I mean, a very, very talented kid, but it was very hot, very cold there. So you don't really know what SC team you're going to get at that particular point. There's an expectation that SC is going to make a jump from a defensive line perspective, but UCLA's upgraded from an offensive line perspective. So that matchup hopefully is somewhat of a strength on strength. You throw in the rivalry aspect of it, all the records go away.
Lincoln Riley's job status,
SC, Lincoln Riley's job status could be in question going into that game. SC maybe could be sitting on 3 losses going into that game, right on the line between in the college football playoff and not. If UCLA sort of upsets SC to deny them an opportunity for a college football playoff berth. So I think just the emotions of that game are going to be so high. And because I think from a talent standpoint, the gap is much closer than many realize, to me, I really like that Michigan State game and the SC game as well, given how much it can swing things. And like we talked about, Will, I think the floor here is 4 wins. I think the ceiling here is 9. And to me, it's these 5 swing games. You go 5-0, you get to 9. You go 3-2, you're at 7. To me, it's really going to come down to those swing games to determine success. Your thoughts there?
Yeah, Michigan State being in East Lansing, that just presents a tough matchup for UCLA. And we don't get a week off, really, with these quarterbacks in conference. I mean, Aiden Childs is like one of the last names we're mentioning. It was one of the best dual-threat quarterbacks in the entire country last year. He needs to work on his passing a little bit more, but look at what Jonathan Smith did with DJU compared to what he did at Florida State. This guy is a quarterback whisperer. Jonathan Smith was a guy that we were very interested in as a head coaching candidate before the DeShaun Foster thing occurred. So I give Michigan State a lot of credit. Their defense is not what it used to be. I listened to a really good podcast kind of previewing Michigan State on the PFF show. So they've lost a lot of bodies. They lost their 2 best edge rushers, if you count Anthony Jones coming to UCLA, and they lost their best corner. So that game, I think, is very similar to the Utah kind of front. I think that game will probably be a shootout between Aiden Childs and Nico, given our concerns with that front 7 and lack of a pass rush, especially if you got a guy that can move like Childs and extend on those 3rd and longs and make plays. So that's going to be a big one. And then the USC game, I mean, come on. What else do we need to talk about with this one? This is like the greatest rivalry on the West Coast. And there's so many storylines going into this year. Iamaleava, them kind of sticking with Jaden Iamaleava, given all the uncertainty around the program right now. And yes, they're killing it in recruiting, but can Lincoln Riley even make it to see the fruits of his labor in that 26 class come out recruiting? I do think they've got a very elite wide receiver duo.
No question.
In Lane. I think that's going to be one of their strengths. We have 13 new guys in the secondary, though, so we just got to line them up and make plays in that front. But yes, it's going to be back at the Coliseum. I would kill to see our boy Nico signing autographs like Dorian Thompson-Robinson was doing in a drubbing. So let me see that coming soon because, man, it's going to be a lot of fun. Madman, I mean, we're going to be watching nonstop football in huge marquee matchups at that for the last 7-8 weeks of the season. It's like this is a breath of fresh air. Football season's already great, but when you got these type of matchups for UCLA, your Big Red Nebraska, we're going to be going to the freaking Horseshoe next year. I can't remember the last time we played them. I think it was 2001, but dude, it's going to be amazing. And just the season we have and the optimism this team presents itself right now is a breath of fresh air, man.
No question about it, Will. And given the optimism going into the season and the fact that it just feels like the whole second, half, and I would say the latter 2/3 of the season, that final 8 games, it just feels like it's a 50-50 game with the exception of maybe at Ohio State, and a couple others. But it just feels like it's either a marquee game or it's a 50-50 game or it's against a huge fan base or sort of a historic program. So week over week, seeing UCLA, I think, on national TV against really big brands, it's going to be such a platform and a showcase for what DeShaun is trying to build here, both on the field as well as in terms of recruiting and the talent pipeline moving forward. So, Will, I think the moral of the story here for our fans is buckle up because there's very few, there might be a few gimmies there at the beginning of the year, and then everything else is going to be sort of a tooth and nail battle. And that's the beauty of college football here, the ebbs and the flows. This has all the makings to be one of the most exciting UCLA football seasons in recent memory, given the momentum, given Nico Iamaleava, given the schedule, given now the presence in the Big Ten year two. I think it's just so much to be excited about, and we just can't wait to break it all down day after day and week after week, Thriller. This has been so much fun. Folks, we're going to get back on here really soon, talk about a number of other things leading into 2025. But guys, football is only 40 days away. Pack that Rose Bowl with the Utes. Let's be loud. Let's be proud. Let's set a new tone and a direction for this program and really protect the home turf in the Rose Bowl. Folks, have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy the city. Be safe. Enjoy yourselves. And as always, fours up forever.